The last time Maya Collins checked her bank account, the number staring back at her was 214, 8 days until rent was due, $214 to her name, and a 7-year-old boy asleep in the next room who still believed his mother had everything under control. It was past midnight when the knock came soft, almost apologetic, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they deserved an answer. Maya stood in the hallway and her socks hand flat against the door and told herself not to open it. She opened it anyway. The man on her porch was soaking wet. He looked to be in his late 60s with the kind of face that had been weathered by more than just weather. He held a worn wooden box tucked under one arm, clutched against his ribs like it was the only thing he still owned, and he wasn't asking to come in. He was asking for directions to the nearest shelter. Maya knew that shelter had stopped taking people 2 hours ago. She looked at the empty couch behind her, then back at him. One night, she said. Just the couch. 3 weeks later, a lawyer knocked on her door because of that man, and nothing about Maya's life would ever be the same. If stories like this one stay with you, consider subscribing. Every week, we bring you real human moments, the kind that remind you what people are actually capable of when it matters. Maya Collins had learned early that survival was not a dramatic thing. It didn't announce itself. It showed up quietly in the form of a second job, a skipped meal, a smile held together with nothing but willpower, while a 7-year-old asked why they couldn't order pizza like they used to. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Cleveland, in a neighborhood that had once been working class and was now just tired. The radiator knocked every night at 11. The bathroom faucet dripped no matter how hard she turned the handle. The lock on the back door required a specific 2-fingered trick she'd never gotten around to teaching anyone else, because there was no one else to teach. She worked mornings at Brightside Laundry on Prospect Avenue, sorting, folding, running machines that smelled like other people's lives. 3 nights a week, she took a second shift at Maplewood Recovery Center, a rehabilitation facility 12 minutes from home, where she helped with overnight care for elderly patients. The pay wasn't good. The hours were punishing. But the work was honest, and honest work was something Maya had decided to hold on to even when everything else had let her go. Her son Noah was 7 years old, and already too perceptive for his own good. He had her eyes and his father's jawline, and a habit of watching people's faces too carefully, like he was always checking to see if the expression matched the words. He was afraid of the dark, but he never cried about it. He would simply appear in Maya's doorway at 2 in the morning, pillow tucked under his arm, and climb in beside her without a word. She always made room. She always would. His father, Derek, had left 18 months ago. Not all at once, that would have been cleaner. He had left gradually, in the way that certain men did, first the evenings, then the weekends, then the child support checks that came late, then less than stopped entirely. Maya had filed the paperwork. She had made the calls. She had done everything right, and it hadn't mattered, because the law moved slowly, and rent was due every 30 days regardless. $214. 8 days. She had done the math so many times it had stopped feeling like math and started feeling like a sentence. Her mother, Rose Collins, had died 4 years earlier from a stroke, quietly in the same unhurried way she had done most things in her life. Rose had been a deeply practical woman, with a deep capacity for kindness, which she'd always treated as 2 sides of the same coin. She used to say, "A locked door keeps you alive. An open door keeps you human. The wisdom is knowing which one the moment calls for." Maya had carried that with her. She wasn't sure she had ever fully understood it. She was careful with Noah. Careful about who came near him, who was allowed to matter to him. She had watched her son lose his father and had promised herself she would not let him lose anything else. Not a home, not a sense of safety, not the ordinary belief that the people in his life would stay. She kept that promise the only way she knew how, by keeping the circle small, the doors locked, and her expectations low. That was the world Maya Collins lived in on the night the knock came. That was everything she had built to protect herself. And none of it had prepared her for a wet old man holding a wooden box in the rain. The man on the porch didn't move when she opened the door. He stood with his shoulders slightly forward, the way people stood when they had stopped expecting good things from open doors, and he held the wooden box against his side like it weighed more than it should. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had once been used to giving instructions in large spaces. "I was told there's a shelter on Renner Street. I just need to know if I'm going the right way." Maya looked past him at the street. The rain was the kind that didn't fall so much as hang in the air, cold and directionless. He had no umbrella, no bag that she could see other than the box. His jacket was a thin canvas thing soaked through to nothing. "Renner Street closed at 10, she said. He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Is there another one nearby? The one on 5th takes walk-ins until midnight." She paused. "It's about 2 miles from here." He looked down the street, then back at her with an expression that wasn't quite resignation. It was more like a man doing quiet arithmetic, calculating what 2 miles in this rain would cost him. He nodded again and said, "Thank you, ma'am." Then he turned to go. Maya watched him take the first step down from the porch, and something moved in her chest, not sentiment exactly. Something older than that. Her father had died alone in a hospital bed on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 hours before she'd been able to get there. She had spent a long time afterward thinking about the people who had walked past his door that day and kept walking. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame doing her own arithmetic. Noah was asleep. The couch was 6 feet from the front door. She had her phone. She had the 2-fingered lock on the back door, and 23 years of reading people developed across countless overnight shifts with strangers. "One night," she said, "just the couch. You're gone before my son wakes up." The man turned around. In the porch light, she could see his face more clearly now. Deep-set eyes, that had been strong once, the stillness of someone who had learned not to want too much. He looked at her for a moment, like he was giving her time to change her mind. "I don't want to impose," he said. "You're not imposing. I offered." She stepped aside. "Come in." He wiped his boots on the mat, both of them carefully, before crossing the threshold. Inside, he stood in the small entryway and looked around the apartment with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not judgment. Something quieter than that. "Samuel Reed," he said, and extended his hand. "Maya Collins." She shook it. His grip was firm, but his fingers trembled slightly just for a second before he steadied them. She got him a towel and a blanket and pointed out the bathroom at the end of the hall. While he cleaned up, she stood in the kitchen and stared at the wall and questioned every decision she had made in the last 4 minutes. Then she checked on Noah, still asleep, one arm thrown over his face, locked his bedroom door from the outside, and slid her phone under her own pillow. When Samuel came back to the living room, he sat on the edge of the couch and set the wooden box on the floor beside him. As he set it down, Maya noticed something carved into the lid, a name she thought, though the letters were worn and the light too low to read clearly from where she stood. She didn't ask. It wasn't her business. "Thank you," Samuel said quietly. "This is more than most people would do." Maya turned off the kitchen light. "Get some sleep, Mr. Reed." She went to her room and did not sleep for a very long time. Maya was up before 6, the way she always was, moving quietly through the apartment in the gray early light. She expected to find him already gone. She half hoped for it, the clean resolution of a good deed. With no complications. No awkward morning conversation. No explaining to Noah why there was a stranger on the couch. Instead, she found the couch empty and neatly made the blanket folded into a precise square, the pillow set on top, and Samuel Reed standing at her kitchen sink washing the dishes she had left in the drying rack the night before. He heard her come in and turned slightly. "Hope this is all right," he said. "Old habit." Maya looked at the counter. The dishes were stacked cleanly. The dish towel had been refolded and hung over the oven handle. On the floor near the front door, she noticed the loose door handle, the one that had been wobbling for 4 months. The one she kept meaning to fix and never had time to, was tight. A small screwdriver from her junk drawer sat beside it, wiped clean. She stood in the kitchen doorway and didn't say anything for a moment. "You fixed the handle," she said finally. "Found the screwdriver in the drawer by the stove. Took 2 minutes." He dried his hands on the towel. "I hope that's not overstepping." Before she could answer, she heard the soft thud of Noah's feet in the hallway. The uneven rhythm of a child who was still mostly asleep, but had been woken by the smell of a morning that felt different from usual. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas, hair pressed flat on one side, and stopped when he saw Samuel. He didn't look frightened. He looked curious in the careful way he always did, taking his time reading the room. Samuel looked back at him with the same steadiness. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Noah said, "Are you my grandpa?" The kitchen went completely quiet. Maya opened her mouth, but Samuel got there first, not with words, but with the expression that crossed his face. It wasn't amusement or dismissal. It was something more unguarded than either of those things, a flicker of something that passed through his eyes and was gone before she could name it. "No," he said gently. "I'm just someone your mom was kind enough to help out." Noah considered this with great seriousness. "Oh," he said. "Then do you want cereal?" Samuel glanced at Maya. She gave a small nod she wasn't entirely sure she had intended to give. "I'd like that very much," Samuel said. The three of them sat at the kitchen table and ate cereal, and Maya noticed that Samuel ate slowly and that his hands were still around the bowl, and that Noah talked the entire time about a book he was reading about bridges, and that Samuel listened to every word with the full attention of someone who had nowhere else to be. When breakfast was done, Samuel stood and thanked her again. He picked up the wooden box from beside the couch, tucked it under his arm, and moved toward the door. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still the color of old concrete, and the temperature had not climbed above freezing. Maya looked at the sky, then at him. "It's supposed to drop to 18 tonight," she said. Samuel said nothing. He just waited. "2 more days," she said. "Then you need to find somewhere to go." He nodded once. "That's fair." He stayed 2 days, then 3, then a week. It didn't happen the way Maya had expected. There was no moment where she made a conscious decision to let him stay longer. It accumulated the way most things in her life did, in small increments she only recognized in retrospect. The faucet that had dripped for 11 months stopped dripping on the second morning. The hinge on Noah's bedroom door, which had squealed every time it moved, went silent on the third. The wobbly kitchen chair that she'd been meaning to reinforce with wood glue since last winter was solid by the end of the first week. Samuel worked without announcing himself, without asking permission, without drawing attention to what he'd done. Maya would simply notice in the way you noticed when something that had always been wrong was suddenly right. She set boundaries, and he respected every one of them without being asked twice. He stayed out of Noah's room. He didn't touch her phone or her mail. He ate what she offered and didn't ask for more. He was in bed, or rather on the couch, by 9 every night, and he was always up before her, the kitchen already tidied, the coffee already made in the second-hand machine. She'd never quite figured out how to program correctly. Her neighbor Denise, who lived in the unit directly below, and had an opinion about everything that happened within a 3-floor radius, cornered Maya at the mailboxes on day 4. "How long is he staying?" Denise asked without preamble. "A few more days," Maya said. Denise gave her a long look. "A kid who's been left by one person will attach fast to the next one, who shows up and stays still," she said. "That's not an accusation. That's just how it works." Maya knew she was right. She had been watching Noah carefully all week, tracking the small shifts in his behavior, the way she tracked everything quietly, without letting on that she was doing it. And Denise was right. Noah had begun to orbit Samuel the way he used to orbit Derek in the early days, before Derek had made it clear that his orbit had other priorities. Every morning Noah came to breakfast with a new question ready. Not childish questions, careful ones. How do hinges work? Why does wood expand in the rain? What's the strongest shape in construction? Samuel answered every question with the same unhurried seriousness he brought to everything else. He didn't talk down to Noah. He didn't perform enthusiasm. He simply answered, and when he didn't know something, he said, and somehow that was the thing that made Noah trust him most. One afternoon, day 9 though, Maya had stopped counting out loud. She came home from her laundry shift to find the two of them sitting on the kitchen floor. Between them was a small piece of cedar wood, 2 small hinges, and her junk drawer emptied onto the floor in an organized spread of tools. Noah was trying to fit the hinges onto what appeared to be the beginnings of a very small box. Maya stood in the doorway and watched without announcing herself. "Not too tight," Samuel said quietly. "You want it to move. A hinge that can't move isn't doing its job." Noah screwed carefully, tongue pressed between his teeth. Maya went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall for a while. That evening, after Noah was asleep, she poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Samuel without asking if he wanted it. He wrapped both hands around the mug, and she noticed, not for the first time, the faint tremor in his fingers, there and then controlled like something he had learned to manage. "Tell me about the woodworking," she said. He looked at the coffee. Then he told her. He had run Reed & Sons Custom Woodworking for 31 years, a shop on the east side that had built everything from kitchen cabinets to church pews to the front doors of a library downtown that was still standing. He had built the shop up from a single truck and 2 employees to a 12-person operation. He had loved it the way some men loved their children, with a fierce, daily, unglamorous devotion. Then his wife Margaret had gotten sick. Not quickly, the way some illnesses moved, but slowly and expensively, the way the worst ones did. He had sold the truck first, then the equipment, then the building. When Margaret died, he had gone to live with his daughter Elaine and her husband in their house in Shaker Heights, and he had tried very hard not to take up too much space. "I lasted 8 months," he said. "I could see it the way they rearranged their lives around me. The way Elaine would check on me at night when she thought I was asleep." He shook his head slightly. "She's a good woman. She was doing everything right. But a man can only be a burden for so long before it changes something in him." He had left on a Tuesday morning while Elaine was at work. He had taken the wooden box, his medication, and 1 change of clothes. "I've been moving around since October," he said. It was now the 2nd week of December. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You told me you were looking for the shelter on Renner Street. I was. You walked past two closer ones to get to my street. Samuel looked at his coffee. He didn't answer. Maya didn't push. But something shifted in her that evening, some reclassification she couldn't quite name. She had let him stay because she was practical and the temperature was 18 degrees. She had kept letting him stay because he was useful and kept to himself. But sitting across from him now, she understood that Samuel Reed was not a problem to be managed. He was a man who had spent 31 years building things, who had loved one woman long enough to lose everything for her, and who had walked away from his daughter's house not out of stubbornness, but out of a dignity that the world didn't always know what to do with. Same time tomorrow, she said, nodding at the coffee cups. Samuel looked up. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Same time, he said. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days, in that Maya first saw the name on the box. She had come home early from Maplewood. One of the other overnight aides had covered her last hour and found Samuel sitting at the kitchen table alone, the wooden box open in front of him. He didn't hear her come in. She stood in the entryway for a moment, coat still on, and watched him. I was looking at something inside the box. His hands were flat on the table on either side of it, not touching anything, just framing it. His head was bowed slightly, the way people bowed their heads in places that required quiet. Whatever was inside, he wasn't reading it or handling it. He was just sitting with it the way you sat with something you had carried so long. It had become less like an object and more like a part of your own weight. Maya took a step back and let the door make its normal sound as she came in. Samuel looked up and closed the box in one unhurried motion. Not guilty, just private. The way a person closed a door to a room that was theirs. You're home early, he said. Slow night. She hung up her coat. Noah still at the Petersons. Another hour, he said. She moved to the kitchen, and that was when she saw it, the lid of the box now closed facing her from across the table. Carved into the wood in careful practiced letters was a single name. Rose. Maya stopped moving. She stared at the name for what felt like a long time, but was probably only a second or two. Then she looked up at Samuel. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, steady, unhurried, giving nothing away. She thought Rose is a common name. She thought half the women of that generation were named Rose. She thought, this is not about your mother. Nice box, she said. Her voice came out even. I made it myself, Samuel said. About 30 years ago. She nodded and moved to the refrigerator and stood there longer than she needed to, staring at its contents without seeing them. Behind her, she heard Samuel pick up the box and carry it back to his corner of the living room, the small, organized space beside the couch, where he kept his few things arranged with the neatness of a man who had learned not to spread out. She told herself it was a coincidence. She almost believed it. 3 days later, Noah asked Samuel to teach him how to make a box. Maya had expected Samuel to deflect, to say he didn't have the tools, or that Noah was too young, or to offer some gentler version of no. Instead, he said, "What kind of box?" And the two of them spent the next 20 minutes at the kitchen table negotiating the specifications of a box for Noah's rock collection, with the seriousness of two people drawing up a contract. Maya sat on the couch and watched them, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. It was close to gratitude, but heavier. It was close to grief, but warmer. It sat in her chest, like something that had been cold for a long time, and was only now cautiously beginning to thaw. That evening, after Noah was asleep, she and Samuel sat with their coffee as had become their habit. The wooden box sat on the far end of the table where Samuel had set it down earlier. In the low kitchen light, the carved letters caught the shadow differently than they had in the afternoon. Rose. Maya looked at it for a moment, then at Samuel. Who was she? She asked. Samuel looked at the box for a long time. Then he said, my wife. How long were you married? 38 years. Maya nodded. She did the math without meaning to 38 years. That was a life. That was someone whose absence was not an event, but a permanent alteration of everything. She sounds like she was loved, Maya said. She was cool, Samuel said simply. Every day. He picked up his coffee. His hands were steadier tonight than they sometimes were, and Maya noticed that filed it away in the quiet running inventory she kept of the things that mattered. She almost asked more. She could feel the question forming. Did she grow up in Cleveland? Did you know anyone named Collins? Is there any reason you walked past 2 shelters to get to my street? But she stopped herself. It felt like pulling at a thread she wasn't ready to follow. If there was a connection, it would surface when it was ready. And if there wasn't, she had no interest in building one out of nothing, just because she was lonely enough to want one. She let it go. But that night, lying awake in the dark, she thought about the carved name on the lid of a box that a man had made with his own hands 30 years ago and had carried with him through the loss of his business, his home, his wife, and whatever came after. She thought about her mother, who had also been named Rose, and who had also loved quietly and without fanfare, and had left without enough warning. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and told herself to sleep. The call came on a Thursday evening, while Maya was folding laundry on her bed and Noah was doing homework at the kitchen table. Her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize, a 266 area code local, which was the only reason she answered. Is this Maya Collins? The woman's voice was controlled in the way that suggested it was being controlled deliberately, the voice of someone who had learned to keep themselves together in situations that required it. Yes, Maya said. She set down the shirt she was folding. My name is Elaine Hartley. Samuel Reed is my father. Maya sat down on the edge of the bed. How did you get this number? My father had it written down. He keeps a small notebook, addresses, numbers. I found your name in it. A pause. He's staying with you. It wasn't a question. Maya considered her answer for a moment. He has been, yes. For about 2 weeks. She heard Elaine exhale something between relief and a more complicated emotion that Maya couldn't name from the other end of a phone line. I've been looking for him since November, Elaine said. He left without telling me where he was going. That's something he does. When he thinks he's becoming too much for the people around him, he disappears before they can tell him he isn't. Maya was quiet. Ms. Collins, I need you to know something about my father's health. Elaine's voice tightened slightly, then steadied. He was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's about 14 months ago. It's manageable right now, but he has to take his medication consistently, and he doesn't always do that. He thinks if he stays somewhere long enough for people to see him at his worst, they'll... She stopped. He'd rather disappear than be witnessed. Maya thought about the tremor in Samuel's hands, the way he controlled it quickly before it could be seen. The mornings she had noticed him moving more slowly than usual, the careful way he lowered himself into chairs. He's been taking his medication here, Maya said. As far as I can tell. That's good. Another pause. How is he? Maya considered the question honestly. He fixed everything in my apartment that was broken. He taught my son about hinges. He drinks his coffee black, and he's asleep by 9, and he hasn't asked me for a single thing. Elaine was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly, something had loosened in it. That's him, she said softly. That's exactly him. He talks about you, Maya said. Not much, but when he does, it's... She searched for the right word. It's clear. I know he left because he thought he was protecting me, Elaine said. He's been protecting me his whole life. He doesn't know how to stop. She paused. Ms. Collins, I'm not calling to take him away or to make him come home if he doesn't want to. I just needed to know he was safe, and I need you to know what you're dealing with in case... She stopped again. In case he gets worse, Maya said. Yes. Maya stood up from the bed and walked to her window. Outside the street was quiet, the sidewalks salted white from the morning's freeze. Under the streetlight, she could see the front steps of her building. The railing Samuel had tightened on his third day there, without being asked, without saying anything about it. He's not a burden, Maya said. I want you to know that. Whatever he thinks about himself right now, he's not that. Elaine didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was careful and quiet. Would you tell him I called? Maya thought about it. Yes, she said. I'll tell him. She hung up and stood at the window for a while. Then she went to the kitchen doorway and watched Noah work through a math problem, erasing and trying again, with the focused patience of a child who had decided that giving up was not an option. She understood suddenly exactly where he had learned that. She told Samuel about the call the following morning, over coffee without preamble. He listened without interrupting. His hands were wrapped around his mug and his eyes were on the table, and he didn't move until she had finished. Then he was quiet for a long moment. She shouldn't have worried, he said. She's your daughter, Maya said. Worrying is the job. He didn't argue with that. He picked up his coffee and drank and set it down and looked out the window at the gray December sky. I'll call her, he said finally. Tonight. Good. That was all either of them said about it. 4 days later. Maya was woken at 2:30 in the morning by a sound she couldn't immediately identify. A dull, heavy impact from the direction of the bathroom, followed by silence that felt wrong in the way that certain silences did. She was in the hallway before she was fully awake, moving on instinct, and she pushed open the bathroom door to find Samuel on the floor beside the tub. He had one hand braced against the side of the tub and was trying to push himself upright, but his arms were shaking too hard to hold his weight. The wooden box was on the floor beside him. It must have been on the edge of the sink, and the fall had knocked the lid open. Maya crossed the room in 2 steps and got her arm under his. I've got you, she said. Don't push. Just let me. I'm fine, he said, and the words came out with the stubbornness of a man who had been saying them long past the point where they were true. You're on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, she said. So let's table that for now. She got him upright, slowly, her shoulder under his arm, one hand bracing his back. He was heavier than he looked, or perhaps it was the dead weight of a body that had stopped cooperating, and for a moment she felt the full reality of what Elaine had told her, that this would get worse, that the manageable thing would become less manageable, that the hands that had built an entire business from the ground up were now shaking on a bathroom floor in a stranger's apartment. She got him to the edge of the tub, and he sat breathing steadily, hands pressed flat against his knees. On the floor, the wooden box lay open. Maya wasn't trying to look, but the box was at her feet, and the bathroom light was on. And there was no way to not see. 3 amber prescription bottles, their labels facing up. A folded letter, the paper soft and worn at the creases in the way of something read many times. And a photograph, small, slightly overexposed in the way of pictures from a certain era that had slid halfway out from under the letter when the box fell. She could see the bottom half of the image. 2 women standing in front of a house. A white railing the style of the 1990s, with turned wooden posts she associated with a certain kind of modest, well-kept home. One of the women was wearing a blue cardigan she almost recognized. Then Samuel reached down and picked up the box, gathering everything back inside with careful hands, and closed the lid. Maya looked away. She helped him back to the couch, got him a glass of water and his medication. He took it without protest, which told her more than anything else how shaken he was, and pulled the blanket over him. She turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway for a moment. "Samuel," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Call Elaine tomorrow. Not tonight you sleep, but tomorrow." He looked at her for a long moment. In the dim light, his face was tired in a way that went beyond the fall, beyond the illness. The tiredness of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was beginning to understand that he could not carry it alone indefinitely. "All right," he said. Maya went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. She thought about the blue cardigan. She thought about the white porch railing. She thought about the name carved on the lid of the box and the woman who had worn that name her whole life, and the way some things refused to be coincidences no matter how hard you tried to let them. She didn't sleep for a long time. Noah's birthday was on a Saturday. He had been talking about it for 2 weeks, not about presents, which was the thing that struck Maya every time, but about the cake. He wanted yellow cake with chocolate frosting, which had been his request every year since he was 4, and he wanted to eat it at the kitchen table with the people he loved. That was the exact phrase he had used with the seriousness of a child who meant every word precisely the people he loved. Maya had seen the card. She hadn't meant to. It had slipped from Noah's backpack when he dropped it by the door on Thursday afternoon, and she had picked it up without thinking and read the front before she understood what it was. A folded piece of blue construction paper decorated with careful crayon drawings of a house and a tree, and 2 figures that were clearly meant to be a boy and an old man. Inside, in Noah's careful second-grade printing, "Dear Ogram Sam. Can you stay forever, love Noah." She had put it back without saying anything. On Thursday evening she had noticed Samuel sitting at the kitchen table after Noah went to bed, turning the card over in his hands. He didn't know she could see him from the hallway. She watched him read it once, then set it down flat on the table and put his hand over it, and sit like that for a long time. Friday morning he was gone. The couch was made with the same precision as always. Blanket folded, pillow squared. His small collection of things was gone from the corner of the living room. The wooden box was gone. The only evidence that he had ever been there was the tightened railing on the front steps, the silent hinge on Noah's door, and a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table held down by the salt shaker. Maya read it standing up still in her coat. "You gave me something I didn't expect to find." Again the feeling of sitting inside a home. For a man who doesn't have many days left that is larger than you know. Thank you for one night that became something more. Take care of that boy. He is going to be something. Samuel. She stood in the kitchen for a long time after that. Then she folded the note and put it in the drawer where she kept important things: Noah's birth certificate, her mother's obituary, the lease. Noah woke up at 7, the way he always did on his birthday, bright and certain that the day was going to be good. He came to the kitchen in his pajamas and looked at the living room. He looked at the couch for a long moment. Then he went to the kitchen table and sat down and picked up the blue construction paper card that was still sitting there. Samuel had left it exactly where it had been and held it in both hands. He didn't cry. He sat very still, the way he sat when he was working something out, and looked at the card with the focused patience that Maya had spent 7 years watching him apply to hard things. After a while he said, "Did he have to go?" Maya sat down across from him. Yes, she said. He had to go. Is he okay? She thought about how to answer that honestly, without saying more than Noah needed to carry. He's where he needs to be, she said. Noah nodded slowly. He set the card down on the table face up and smoothed it flat with his palm. Then he looked at his mother with her own eyes, the careful, steady reading, the room eyes, and said, "Can we still have yellow cake?" "We can absolutely have yellow cake," Maya said. He nodded again, satisfied. He was 7 years old, and he had already learned the thing that took most people decades, that grief and birthday cake were not incompatible, that you could hold both at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. Maya got up and started breakfast, and outside the window. The December sky was the color of old pewter, and the apartment was very quiet. 3 weeks passed. Maya paid the rent with money she had borrowed from her tax return advance and told herself she would figure out the rest in January. She picked up an extra shift at Maplewood on weekends. She bought Noah's birthday cake and watched him blow out the candles and took a picture of his face in the moment after, when the smoke was still rising and he was already reaching for the frosting. She did not hear from Samuel. She had not expected to. But she caught herself in unguarded moments listening for the sound of the front door, the specific resistance of the handle that Samuel had tightened on his first morning, which now required slightly more pressure than it used to. She had complained about the old handle for months. Now the fixed one felt like a language she was still learning to read. Noah did not bring up Samuel again after his birthday, but he kept the blue construction paper card on his dresser, propped against his lamp, and Maya noticed that it was always face up, always straightened in the careful way that children kept the things that mattered most. On a Tuesday morning in January, 3 weeks and 2 days after Samuel had left, Maya was getting ready for her laundry shift when she heard the knock. It was a different kind of knock from the one that had started all of this firm, measured the knock of someone with an appointment. She opened the door to find a man in his mid-50s in a charcoal overcoat, holding a leather portfolio and looking at her with the careful, neutral expression of someone trained to deliver information without embellishment. "Ms. Maya Collins," he said. "Yes, my name is Daniel Porter. I'm an attorney." He reached into his portfolio and produced a business card which he held out with both hands. "I represent the estate of Samuel Reed. I wonder if I might have a few minutes of your time." Maya took the card. She read it once. Then she looked up at Daniel Porter and said quietly, almost to herself, "He's gone, isn't he?" It wasn't a question. "Mr. Reed passed away 11 days ago," Daniel Porter said, "at Cedarwood Hospice in Chagrin Falls. He was admitted 4 days after he left your residence." Maya gripped the edge of the door. "He had arranged everything in advance," Daniel continued. "He was very organized, very deliberate." He glanced past her briefly. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He sat at her kitchen table, Samuel's chair, though Daniel Porter didn't know that, and opened his portfolio with the efficient movements of a man who understood that efficiency was its own form of respect in these moments. He explained the terms of the estate clearly and without embellishment. Samuel Reed had left Maya Collins the sum of $52,000, the remainder of the sale of Reed & Sons custom woodworking, after the settlement of medical debts and outstanding obligations. Maya sat across from him and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "No." Daniel Porter looked up from his papers. "I let him sleep on my couch," she said. "For a few weeks, that's all. This isn't something I'm entitled to." "Mr. Reed anticipated this response," Daniel said. He reached into the portfolio and produced a small cloth-covered notebook, the kind sold at drugstores with an elastic band around the cover. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. He asked me to show you this before you made your decision. Maya looked at the notebook without touching it for a moment. Then she picked it up and opened it. It was a list of names. 40, maybe 50 of them written in Samuel's careful hand over what appeared to be several years, the ink varying in color, the handwriting shifting slightly across different entries, as though each name had been added at a different time. Beside each name was a short notation. Gave me a meal. Let me use the phone. Didn't look through me. She found her own name near the middle of the notebook. The notation beside it read, Maplewood, October, gave me her father's coat. Said I didn't have to be cold alone. Maya stared at it. October, she said. He wrote this in October. Yes, Daniel said, approximately 2 months before he came to your door. Maya looked up. He knew me before that night. He had met you once briefly at the facility where you work. Daniel folded his hands on the table. He recognized you when he came to your door. He wanted you to know that the bequest is not an impulse. It is not charity. He paused. He said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, she earned it before she knew she was earning it. Maya closed the notebook. She set it down on the table and put her hand flat over it, and sat like that for a moment, and the kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Noah was at school. The apartment held the stillness of a weekday morning, the radiator, the street sounds, the faint drip of nothing because the faucet no longer dripped. Tell me the rest, she said. Daniel Porter reached into his portfolio one final time and produced the wooden box. Maya recognized it immediately, the worn edges, the careful joinery, the name carved into the lid in letters that had been smoothed by years of handling. He set it on the table between them and said, Mr. Reed asked that this be returned to you personally. He was specific about that word returned. Maya looked at the box without touching it. There's a letter inside, Daniel said. He wrote it himself about a week before he was admitted to Cedarwood. He asked me not to summarize it. He wanted you to read it in his words. He closed his portfolio and stood. I'll give you some time. I can wait outside. She heard the front door close behind him. She sat alone at the kitchen table with the wooden box and the winter light coming through the window and the sound of the radiator ticking steadily in the corner. She opened the box. The 3 prescription bottles were gone. What remained was the folded letter and the photograph. She took out the photograph first. It was small, slightly overexposed, the same one she had half seen on the bathroom floor on the night Samuel fell. But now she could see all of it. 2 women stood in front of a house with a white porch railing. The woman on the left was someone Maya had never seen before. She was in her 60s, small-framed with the look of someone who was ill, but had decided not to let it be the most interesting thing about them. The woman on the right was wearing a blue cardigan. Maya knew that cardigan. She had put it in a donation bag 4 years ago and then taken it back out because she couldn't let it go. It was in a box in her closet right now, folded on top of her mother's other things. The woman on the right was Rose Collins. Maya set the photograph down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something that might break if handled wrong, and picked up the letter. Samuel's handwriting was slow and deliberate, a craftsman's hand, each letter constructed rather than written. He began by apologizing for not telling her sooner. He said he had wanted to several times, but that he needed to know something first, whether Maya was kind, because of who her mother had been, or because of who Maya herself was. He needed to know that the woman who had opened her door was not simply the echo of a woman he had already loved and lost. He needed to know she was her own person, standing on her own ground. He wrote, I believe you are. I want you to know that I saw that clearly. Then he told her about Rose. 7 years earlier, Samuel's wife, Margaret, had been in the final months of a long illness. She had been moved to a palliative care facility, and Samuel had been spending every day there, sleeping in a chair beside her bed. Losing weight, losing track of time, slowly disappearing into the experience of watching someone he loved leave the world. Rose Collins had been a volunteer at that facility. She came twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she did the practical things, tidied rooms, brought books, sat with patients who had no one sitting with them. But what she had done for Margaret was more than practical. She had talked to her. Not about illness, not about dying, but about ordinary things, gardens, recipes, the neighborhood old music. She had treated Margaret like a person who still had opinions worth hearing, at a time when the rest of the world had already begun to speak about her in the past tense. Samuel had watched this from the chair beside the bed for 3 months. On the day Margaret died, Rose had been there. She had stepped out to give Samuel privacy, but before she left the room, she had put her hand briefly on Samuel's arm and said, "A locked door keeps you alive. An open door keeps you human. The wisdom is knowing which one the moment calls for." She had said it quietly, without ceremony, the way she said everything, as though she were offering something useful rather than profound, and it was up to the listener to understand which it was. Samuel had never forgotten it. He had written it down that night in the notebook he kept beside Rose Collins's name. 2 years later, when he was living on the streets of Cleveland and had largely stopped expecting anything from the world, a woman at a rehabilitation facility had given him her father's coat on a cold October night and told him he didn't have to be cold alone. He had looked at her face and recognized the eyes. He had looked at her name tag. He had gone back to his notebook that night and sat with it for a long time. He wrote, "I did not come to your door by accident. But I want to be honest with you, I did not know what I would find. I hoped I would find your mother's daughter. What I found was someone better than that. Someone who had become herself entirely on her own terms, in hard circumstances, without anyone making it easy. The money is not a reward. It is not a debt repaid. It is one person who has run out of time trying to give a small amount of it to someone who deserves more of it. Your mother sat with my wife when no one else did. You let an old man sit on your couch when you had nothing to spare. I have spent my whole life building things meant to last. Consider this the last thing I built. Take care of yourself, Maya. Take care of that boy. Samuel Umachawun." Maya folded the letter along its original creases and set it back in the box beside the photograph. She closed the lid. Her hand rested on the carved name for a moment. Rose, and she thought about her mother sitting in a chair beside a dying woman and talking about gardens and old music. And she thought about how the things we do quietly, without witnesses, without expectation, have a way of traveling further than we will ever know. Later, Daniel Porter mentioned that Elaine had asked him to pass along one final thing, that her father had spoken of Rose Collins for years, and that the moment he saw Maya's name tag at Maplewood, that October night, he had stood very still for a long time before he said a single word. She got up and opened the front door. "Mr. Porter," she said, "I'll accept it." Spring came slowly to Cleveland that year, the way it always did, reluctantly in fits and starts, with cold mornings that contradicted the calendar well into April. Maya started her nursing program in March. 2 evenings a week, she sat in a classroom at Cuyahoga Community College with a notebook and a highlighter, and the focus of someone who understood exactly what they were working toward and why. She was older than most of the other students and didn't mind. She had learned that being late to something was not the same as being wrong for it. She kept her shifts at Maplewood. She kept the laundry job through April, then let it go when the nursing coursework picked up. The morning she didn't go back, she stood in her kitchen and felt something. she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. The lightness of a door closing behind you, on something that was finished, rather than something that had defeated you. Noah finished second grade and started third. He kept the blue construction paper card on his dresser all year. In the spring, he asked Maya if he could use some of the wood scraps in the building's storage room to try finishing the small box he and Samuel had started. She said yes. It took him 6 weeks, and it was not perfectly square, and he was prouder of it than anything he had ever made. He put his rock collection in it. Maya put Samuel's wooden box on the shelf in her living room beside her mother's photograph. The two of them faced the room together. Rose Collins in her blue cardigan, and the carved name on the lid of a box made by a man who had loved someone long enough to carry her name for 30 years. Maya passed them every morning on her way to the kitchen, and every evening on her way to bed, and she did not find it sad. She found it true, which was a different thing entirely. It was a Thursday evening in late October when she came home from her Maplewood shift to find a young woman sitting on the front steps of her building. She was in her early 20s, thin jacket, insufficient for the dropping temperature, a backpack at her feet, and nothing else. She was not crying. She was sitting very still in the way of someone who had decided that stillness was safer than asking. Maya stood on the sidewalk and looked at her. She thought about Samuel on a rain-soaked porch, asking for directions to a shelter that was already closed. She thought about her mother in a chair beside a dying woman talking about gardens. She thought about Noah on a couch with a card he hadn't been able to give, learning that love didn't always get the ending it deserved, but it was still worth the giving. She walked up the steps. "I've got a couch," she said. "One night, just the couch." She unlocked the door and left the porch light on. Maya didn't change the world. She just didn't let the cold win that night. That's the thing about kindness. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't ask for an audience. It shows up at midnight, makes a quiet decision, and keeps moving. And sometimes years later it finds its way back to you in ways you never could have predicted. If this story reminded you that the small things you do for others matter more than you know, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. We'll be here every week looking for the moments that prove people are still worth believing in.